Secret Files. Welcome to Secret Files, where we uncover the hidden mysteries behind the world's most powerful figures. Here, nothing stays in the shadows for long, and what's been concealed for years finally comes to light. Get ready to dive into stories that challenge reality and expose the truth lurking behind the curtains of power. In each episode, we reveal shocking secrets, expose global conspiracies, and uncover the stories they don't want you to know. Brace yourself for the darkest truths of our time. In tonight's episode of Secret Files, we'll reveal one of the most shocking and disturbing cases to ever emerge from the world of entertainment. A mystery that involves one of the most iconic figures in music and his alleged connection to a secret organization with global reach. This is the P. Diddy file. Everything you need to know about P. Diddy and his possible ties to the Freemasons will be exposed right here. Prepare yourself for a dark journey into the heart of the accusations that have shaken Hollywood and the entire world. In recent months, P. Diddy's name has been tied to a series of grave accusations, ranging from physical and psychological abuse to alleged involvement in a global human trafficking network and manipulation of celebrities. At the center of these allegations is an organization known for its power and secrecy, the Freemasons. Since the end of September, the internet and social media have been exploding with theories, news, and rumors about Diddy's involvement in a dark scheme that traces back to the very foundations of Hollywood. But what is fact and what is fiction? What is truly happening behind the bright lights? Today, every major news outlet and social media platform is talking about one thing: the case surrounding renowned music producer and rapper P. Diddy. The revelations are so shocking that they've put the world on high alert. But what really happened? To understand what's at stake, we need to go back to the beginning. Now we'll dive deep into the secrets being brought to light. This story is more than just a celebrity scandal. It's a dark portrait of how power and control can manipulate lives. This file has been meticulously prepared, gathering all the verified information we have so far. Every detail has been thoroughly checked to ensure that what you're about to hear is the truth. We are dealing with one of the most controversial and complicated cases in the entertainment industry. Before we begin unraveling this web of lies, betrayals, and abuses, it's important to emphasize that everything we're about to discuss is based on proven facts. We know that many false stories have circulated, but here we focus only on what can be confirmed. The accusations against P. Diddy gained momentum after he was arrested. The police operation at his home revealed a series of disturbing details that shook both the music industry and the celebrity world. Since then, the details emerging about the case are terrifying. Shocking revelations indicate that P. Diddy wasn't just involved in illegal activities. Many powerful figures in Hollywood were part of this dark web of corruption and abuse. The accusations go far beyond legal violations. We're talking about crimes against humanity itself. The depth of Diddy's involvement, along with other stars in the music and film industry, in cases of abuse, manipulation, and human trafficking, is simply staggering. It all started with a complaint made by Cassie, an actress and former girlfriend of Diddy. She claimed she was physically abused by him on several occasions during violent outbursts. Cassie also alleged that she was forced into degrading acts, under coercion and threat, involving other influential people in the industry. Her relationship with Diddy, which began in 2005 when she was only 17, was marked by years of abuse and manipulation. The age difference between them, Cassie, a teenager, and Diddy at 35, created a highly abusive power dynamic. Cassie was kept under Diddy's control for over a decade until she finally managed to escape in 2018. Disturbing images circulating online show Diddy assaulting Cassie in public outside a hotel elevator. The scenes are shockingly brutal, revealing the level of control he had over her. Cassie reported that she was forced to participate in acts against her will, while Diddy watched with cold, indifferent eyes. Her attempts to escape were always thwarted, until somehow she finally broke free. This toxic relationship began when Cassie was just 17, a young model on the rise, while Diddy was already a powerful figure in the music industry. Throughout their time together, Cassie lived in constant fear, being controlled by Diddy in every aspect of her life, from her appearance to her public actions. For 13 long years, Cassie endured physical and psychological abuse, leaving her both emotionally and physically scarred. She reported that even in public events, the marks of her injuries were visible, but no one dared to question it. Diddy saw himself as Cassie's creator, shaping her life and career according to his own desires and whims. He believed he had total control over her, and his constant aggression was a way of reaffirming that power. But in 2018, something changed. Cassie finally managed to escape from this cycle of violence and control. How did she do it? That remains a mystery. Maybe Diddy decided to let her go, or maybe she found a way to free herself without him noticing. After her escape, Cassie rebuilt her life, remarried, and had a daughter. Her new husband supported and encouraged her to speak out about the abuses she had endured, and it was then that she decided to break her silence. Cassie filed a lawsuit against Diddy, accusing him of human trafficking, physical abuse, domestic violence, and drug-induced coercion. The allegations were shocking, but the evidence soon followed. Security cameras from a Los Angeles hotel captured one of the darkest moments in Cassie and Diddy's relationship. The footage clearly shows Diddy dragging Cassie across the floor as she desperately tries to break free. But this was just the beginning of a much larger case. After Cassie's complaint, over 3,000 new accusations were made against Diddy, involving other victims who claimed they were physically and psychologically abused by him. Investigators, now led by the FBI, began diving deeper into the secret files linking P. Diddy to a network of human trafficking and child exploitation. With each new lead, more disturbing details emerged about the secret parties and macabre rituals that took place in the rapper's luxurious mansions. Some victims reported that upon entering these events, they were quickly isolated, cut off from any contact with the outside world. Inside, the atmosphere was one of decadence and oppression. These events, often described as power parties, were attended by influential people from both the entertainment and political industries. One anonymous witness claimed to have seen a ritual at one such party involving the symbolic sacrifice of a newcomer, a term used to describe those just entering Diddy's circle of influence. The ritual, according to her, was terrifying and carried a dark energy. As more witnesses began to speak out, a pattern emerged. Diddy wasn't just using his power to control his direct victims. He was also subjecting other stars to a cycle of abuse and manipulation. Artists, eager for fame and success early in their careers, were lured into these parties, only to find themselves trapped in a web of favors, blackmail, and secrets. Many were coerced into participating in acts that were later used as a means of control and extortion. Big names like Jennifer Lopez, Jay-Z, and Beyoncé began to surface in several of the allegations. While many of the details were still shrouded in mystery, one thing was clear: these power figures were somehow linked to Diddy, and now their reputations were under serious threat. But what kept them united? What was the true nature of these connections? Once again, the name of the Freemasons was mentioned. Investigators began examining the symbols and codes present at Diddy's parties. Many details suggested that these gatherings were more than just for entertainment. They were a way to ritualize power. The use of ancient symbols, the organization of the events, and even the layout of the venues appeared to align with occult practices. For those not initiated, it all seemed like typical celebrity eccentricity. But for those in the know, it was clear something much deeper was at play. Cassie's case was just the beginning. As more allegations surfaced, it became evident that she wasn't Diddy's only victim. Others came forward with similar accounts of abuse, control, and manipulation. Each new testimony added yet another disturbing layer to the story, and authorities were becoming increasingly convinced they were dealing with something far bigger than a simple celebrity scandal. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a young woman who attended a Diddy party in 2016. She described an atmosphere of fear and submission, where guests were forced to drink beverages offered by mysterious hosts. After drinking a cocktail, she said she completely lost control of her body and only remembered waking up in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by strangers. What happened that night? She didn't know, but the trauma stayed with her forever. The drinks served at nearly all of Diddy's parties were now under investigation. What forensic labs discovered was alarming. Many of the beverages contained a substance called GHB, also known as the date rape drug. Odorless and tasteless, this substance made it easy to slip into drinks without raising suspicion, until it was too late. This confirmed suspicions that Diddy's parties were more than just lavish events. They were carefully planned traps to manipulate and control those who attended. The revelations about the use of GHB at Diddy's events shocked the public. The drug, known for its paralyzing effects, was frequently used to facilitate assaults and abuse. What was once seen as a life of excess and glamorous parties was now being revealed as a systematically organized scheme of abuse. And Diddy, who had spent decades building an image of success and power, was now being portrayed as the center of a dark empire. As the investigation deepened, new accusations began surfacing about Diddy's involvement in even more disturbing activities. Reports indicated that at some of these parties, he participated in rituals where the abuse wasn't just physical, but also psychological, forcing his victims to engage in degrading acts while he watched. These rituals, according to some sources, were designed to test the loyalty of newcomers to his circle. The details of these practices raised more questions about Diddy's connections to secret societies. The symbols, the rituals, and even the dates of these events seemed to follow a ritualistic logic. Many conspiracy theorists began pointing to the Freemasons as the key to understanding what was really happening behind the closed doors of Diddy's mansions. But what truly shocked the public was the revelation that these rituals didn't just involve adults. They involved children as well. Some victims who came forward said they had been taken to these parties when they were minors and were forced to participate in acts that scarred them for life. These revelations added a new layer of horror to the case, transforming it into one of the biggest abuse scandals in recent history. As more brave victims began to tell their stories, it became clear that Diddy's case wasn't an isolated incident. He was part of a much larger network, one that involved powerful figures across various industries, all united by a pact of silence and loyalty. This network, according to the investigations, spanned the globe, connecting the worlds of music, film, politics, and even royalty. The details of these connections began to emerge slowly. The involvement of political figures like Barack and Michelle Obama began to be taken more seriously, especially after documents were leaked, suggesting they had attended some of Diddy's most exclusive parties. Though these allegations still needed to be fully investigated, the mere mention of their names was enough to cause a global stir. Investigators also began focusing on Diddy's ties to controversial figures from the past. One name in particular kept coming up: Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, who had been accused of running a human trafficking ring involving minors, had his own secret parties, attended by members of the global elite. Now, investigators were wondering if Diddy's parties could be connected to those hosted by Epstein. The similarities between the two cases were disturbing. Both men were powerful figures who used their influence to lure vulnerable people into their circles. Both were accused of human trafficking and child abuse. and both had connections to some of the most powerful people in the world. Now, the question everyone was asking was, just how intertwined were these two networks? Investigators also began focusing on Diddy's properties. Mansions, yachts, and party venues scattered across the US and Europe were being investigated as possible sites of abuse. One of the most controversial locations was a mansion in Los Angeles that, according to several witnesses, had a system of underground tunnels leading to secret rooms. These rooms, witnesses said, were used for private rituals and secret meetings. The Los Angeles mansion, one of Diddy's most luxurious properties, became the epicenter of the investigation. Witnesses claimed that beneath the glamorous estate was a complex network of underground tunnels constructed for the sole purpose of facilitating access to secret meetings. Some reported that these tunnels connected the mansion to other properties, including homes of influential Hollywood figures, such as former associates of Michael Jackson, and even the famous Playboy mansion owned by Hugh Hefner. The tunnels, according to the investigation, led to secret rooms where the most disturbing rituals took place. In one of these hidden locations, there was a completely isolated room, without windows and with reinforced walls to muffle sound. Investigators found evidence suggesting the room had been used for private meetings involving powerful individuals, many of whom are now at the center of the scandal. Photographs and videos began to leak, showing the interiors of these rooms and revealing elements that suggested they were far from just casual parties. Moreover, allegations surfaced that Diddy kept these rooms equipped with hidden cameras, recording all the events that took place. These recordings, according to theories, were used to blackmail powerful figures and ensure their loyalty to Diddy's dark circle. The possibility that Diddy possessed incriminating videos of various celebrities and politicians began to create widespread panic in Hollywood. Allegations regarding the use of these videos for blackmail were further supported when a former associate of Diddy revealed to the media that he maintained a digital vault containing thousands of compromising files. She claimed that these recordings involved not only adults at parties, but also scenes involving minors, recorded without the victim's consent. According to her, this digital vault was Diddy's real source of power, allowing him to control some of the most influential people on the planet. The revelation of the digital vault was one of the most shocking aspects of the case. If Diddy truly possessed these recordings, he could destroy entire careers and manipulate key figures in both the entertainment industry and politics. Investigations quickly shifted focus to locating this vault, and some sources speculated that it could be hidden in one of Diddy's many properties scattered around the world. However, so far, authorities have yet to locate this supposed weapon that Diddy allegedly used to control his inner circle. While the search for the vault continued, the investigation began to reveal more disturbing details about the structure of Diddy's network, one that extended far beyond his parties in Hollywood. Reports surfaced that Diddy had connections with influential groups in Europe and South America, where he organized similar gatherings in remote and exotic locations. One such location was said to be a private island, owned by a European businessman famous for his ties to the fashion industry. The island, described as an isolated tropical paradise, was under investigation after several witnesses claimed Diddy hosted parties there for his most intimate associates. These gatherings, according to allegations, followed the same pattern as those that took place in his US mansions: extreme luxury, hand-picked guests, and of course, dark secrets. Some victims reported being forcibly taken to the island, where they were drugged and coerced into participating in degrading acts. The rumors of this island led investigators to draw parallels with the infamous Jeffrey Epstein case, who also used a private island for his secret gatherings. The similarities between the two cases began to raise the hypothesis that Diddy might be involved in a global human trafficking network similar to the one Epstein ran. This network, according to theories, could involve powerful figures across the world, all bound by a pact of silence. But the connections between Diddy and Epstein didn't stop there. Investigations revealed that for several years, the two had moved within the same social circles and on more than one occasion attended the same events. Old photographs show Diddy and Epstein together at lavish parties in New York and Paris. These connections began to raise even more suspicion about the true extent of Diddy's network and its potential links to Epstein's exploitation ring. As the FBI continued to investigate these ties, new witnesses began coming forward with more disturbing details about Diddy's parties. A former security guard who worked for the rapper for over a decade told the press that many of the events were, in fact, covers for meetings where important business and power-related decisions were made. According to him, Diddy used the parties as a facade to attract influential people and keep them under his control. The security guard also claimed that Diddy was always surrounded by people he could easily manipulate. Young artists, models, and aspiring celebrities were often invited to these gatherings under the promise that they were entering Hollywood's most exclusive circle. However, once inside, they realized they were trapped in a web of abuse and manipulation, one that was nearly impossible to escape. One of the most shocking accounts came from a former model who attended one of Diddy's parties when she was just 16 years old. She claimed she had been taken to one of Diddy's events by a modeling agent who promised her an opportunity to meet important producers. However, upon arriving at the party, she was immediately isolated from the other guests and taken to a room where Diddy and other powerful men were waiting. What happened in that room, according to her, changed her life forever. She reported being forced to take drugs and then losing consciousness. When she awoke, she found herself in an unknown location with no memory of what had happened in the previous hours. She tried to escape but was quickly stopped by security, who kept her locked away until Diddy decided what to do with her. Only after several hours of negotiation was she released, but not before receiving threats about what would happen if she ever told anyone about what she had seen or experienced. This kind of account became all too common as more victims came forward. Many of these young women, who had dreamed of entering the world of music or fashion, were lured into parties where their lives were shattered. Some were never seen again, while others, like the model mentioned, were left living with trauma for the rest of their lives. These stories began to paint an increasingly dark picture of Diddy and the power he wielded over his guests. As more accounts surfaced, it became clear that Diddy's parties were just the surface of something much deeper and more terrifying. The connections to the Freemasons, which initially seemed like mere conspiracy theories, began to be taken more seriously. Experts in secret societies were called in to analyze the symbols and rituals described by the victims, and many confirmed that the gatherings followed a ritualistic pattern typical of occult cults. These rituals, according to the experts, were used to invoke power and control over the participants. The use of drugs, the degrading practices, and the symbols present at Diddy's events seemed to have a far deeper meaning than simple hedonism. Some theorists claimed that Diddy was, in fact, following ancient occult traditions, where loyalty was tested through rituals of humiliation and submission. These practices, if confirmed, would place Diddy at the center of a global power network where celebrities and political figures weren't just participants, but also victims of a system that used control and manipulation as tools of domination. What began as a simple abuse allegation had now turned into an investigation into the darkest side of fame and power. But what would happen next? With so many powerful figures involved, would the full truth ever come to light? Or would Diddy's case be buried, like so many scandals before it? The media began speculating about the future of the investigation, and many feared that Diddy could use his power and influence to escape justice. However, the public was growing increasingly outraged by the revelations, and pressure on authorities was mounting. What began as a simple celebrity scandal had now evolved into a battle between truth and power. The investigation entered a new phase, where those involved in the scandal could no longer hide. Public pressure and media coverage intensified, and many celebrities previously associated with Diddy began making desperate moves to distance themselves from the case. However, the damage was already done, and the revelations continued to unfold like a domino effect. Influential figures started deleting social media accounts, erasing old photos, and withdrawing from public events in a frantic attempt to escape the storm. Yet, as more victims came forward, it became impossible for many of these celebrities to avoid being implicated. What once seemed like a scandal confined to Hollywood had now morphed into an international issue, with ramifications for politics, the entertainment industry, and even royalty. One of the most shocking revelations was the involvement of European royalty in Diddy's secret parties. Preliminary investigations suggested that certain members of royal families had attended these clandestine events, where, according to witnesses, human rights violations were a regular occurrence. This ignited a media firestorm in Europe, with the public demanding answers from authorities regarding the extent of these powerful figures' involvement. As details of politicians and royalty participating in these events emerged, the connection between Diddy and Freemasonry became more plausible. Secret society experts were brought in to analyze the symbols and behaviors described by witnesses, and many confirmed that Diddy's parties followed the patterns of occult rituals. Furthermore, objects found during the investigation, such as symbolic artifacts and recordings of rituals, reinforced the theory that these practices were deeply rooted in secretive cults. The impact of these discoveries shook the public to its core. For many, the involvement of public figures in such disturbing practices was inconceivable. However, the growing body of evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Witnesses began to describe scenes from these parties that sounded like something out of a horror movie. Rituals of humiliation, abuse, and mind control were regular occurrences, and those who refused to participate were quickly silenced or cast out from the circle of power. One of the most harrowing accounts came from a Hollywood actress who was just starting her career at the time. She described how she was invited to one of these parties, believing it would be an opportunity to advance her career. However, upon arriving, she was quickly surrounded by powerful figures who coerced her into taking drugs and participating in acts she would never have accepted under normal circumstances. She described how the rituals began with the submission of participants, who were forced to obey orders without question. Those who resisted were threatened or blackmailed. According to her, some of the most powerful people in the industry were present, all seeming to follow a script as if they were part of a carefully orchestrated performance. The details of these rituals included esoteric symbols, phrases spoken in ancient languages, and the use of substances to manipulate the senses and emotions of those present. The investigation into these rituals raised an even more disturbing question: who was really in control? While Diddy appeared to be a central figure, some investigators speculated that he might have been a pawn in a much larger and more powerful network. The Masonic symbols present at many of Diddy's events raised further suspicions. Some occult experts suggested that these rituals were performed as a means to reaffirm power and loyalty within the organization. Freemasonry, known for its initiation rites and hierarchical structures, seemed to play a significant role in organizing these events, with Diddy being just one piece in a much larger game. Once again, the name of Jeffrey Epstein surfaced during the investigation. Epstein, also known for his connections to powerful figures and secret parties, had ties to many of the same social circles as Diddy. The similarities between the two cases were unsettling, leading many to wonder whether they were part of the same global network of exploitation and abuse. Both men used their influence to manipulate and control vulnerable people, and both had a vast network of contacts that included politicians, celebrities, and members of the elite. The investigation also delved deeper into Diddy's connections with other influential figures in the industry. One name that came up frequently was Kanye West, who had been associated with Diddy for years through events and musical collaborations. Kanye, known for his controversial statements and erratic behavior, was now being investigated for possible involvement in Diddy's parties. While no direct accusations had been made against him yet, many began to question how much he knew about what went on at these gatherings. Other big names, such as Jay-Z and Beyoncé, also began to appear in the investigation. Although the couple had distanced themselves from Diddy in recent years, the fact that they had been seen at several of his parties during the 2000s raised suspicions. Old photos of the three together at private events began resurfacing, leaving many to wonder whether they too had been involved in the occult practices happening behind closed doors. The involvement of political figures like Barack and Michelle Obama became one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Although no concrete evidence had emerged to suggest their direct participation in the rituals, their names had appeared on guest lists for exclusive events organized by Diddy. Additionally, photos of the Obamas at lavish parties alongside other questionable figures began circulating, further fueling speculation. As the investigation deepened, the pressure on Diddy intensified. He had already been arrested and charged with multiple offenses, but with each new revelation, the case grew darker. The possibility that he was involved in a global network of human trafficking and sexual abuse seemed increasingly likely, and many questioned whether he would be able to evade the consequences. To the surprise of many, Diddy seemed ready to face these accusations head-on. Powerful and influential attorneys began representing him, and a narrative that he was the victim of a conspiracy started circulating in the media. Some conspiracy theorists even suggested that Diddy was being used as a scapegoat by even more powerful forces, with his trial serving as a distraction from the real figures behind the exploitation network. But the evidence against him continued to mount. With every new allegation, more proof surfaced, pointing to Diddy as the mastermind behind a decades-long scheme of manipulation and abuse. Audio recordings, videos, and victim testimonies all pointed to a web of power and control that stretched far beyond Hollywood. The most terrifying aspect of the case was that many of the victims continued to fear for their lives, even after coming forward. One of the bravest victims was a former associate of Diddy's, who decided to share her story with the media. She claimed that Diddy kept a list of all the influential people he had blackmailed over the years, using secret recordings from his parties to ensure that no one dared cross him. According to her, this list included politicians, musicians, actors, and even journalists. Diddy's power was built on fear and intimidation. This former associate also revealed that Diddy had a network of accomplices, including security guards and personal assistants, who helped keep his activities under wraps. They were responsible for ensuring that no details of the parties leaked out, and many were handsomely paid to keep quiet. However, as the investigation progressed, some of these accomplices began cooperating with authorities in exchange for immunity. The investigation also expanded overseas, with authorities in various countries beginning to look into Diddy's international properties. His mansions in Europe and South America were mentioned in several allegations and were now under surveillance. The idea that Diddy maintained an international network of exploitation gained traction, and international authorities started working with the FBI to trace all of his global activities. Meanwhile, the public waited anxiously for more revelations. Social media was abuzz with discussions about celebrity involvement and the true scope of Diddy's network. The name once synonymous with success and power in the music industry was now irrevocably linked to scandal and horror. What would come next? The investigations were far from over, and with each passing day, more witnesses, more evidence, and more unanswered questions emerged. The case of P. Diddy, which began with a single abuse allegation, had now become one of the most complex and disturbing investigations of recent times. And the most unsettling part was that the deeper authorities dug, the darker the truth behind Diddy and his web of power seemed to become. The investigation entered an even deeper stage, uncovering a complex network of accomplices and influential figures intertwined with Diddy's activities. What began as a focus on Diddy's personal crimes had now expanded to expose a well-organized structure involving multiple individuals in positions of power. The ramifications of this case extended far beyond Hollywood, crossing international borders and connecting powerful figures in various industries and even global politics. Encouraged by the growing momentum of public allegations, more victims came forward. Many had spent years in silence, terrified by the threats made by Diddy and his associates. One such victim, a former dancer who worked at events organized by Diddy, revealed chilling details about the parties. She described how guests were often led to private sections, where they were coerced into participating in power games and rituals of submission. These games involved acts designed to degrade and humiliate participants, testing their loyalty and compliance. In one particularly disturbing account, the dancer recalled witnessing a bizarre ritual where a group of guests was forced to compete in humiliating challenges, while Diddy and other powerful figures watched, laughing and drinking. The atmosphere was oppressive, and those who refused to participate were immediately escorted out, permanently banned from Diddy's circle of influence. Experts compared this behavior to cult practices, where psychological and mental control are used to maintain dominance over members. These revelations shed new light on the case, revealing that it wasn't just physical abuse, but also a form of psychological manipulation. The parties once promoted as glamorous and exclusive events were in fact stages for a series of manipulation rituals. Many who attended these gatherings left with their lives and careers shattered, while others simply disappeared from the public eye. The parallels between Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein continued to grow as both men used their exclusive parties to lure vulnerable individuals and powerful elites into their clutches. Both maintained a tightly controlled circle of associates to help hide their crimes, and both were at the center of global exploitation networks. What made Diddy's case even more disturbing was the revelation that he didn't just use these parties for his own desires, but as tools of blackmail and manipulation. Leaked documents and recordings began to surface, suggesting that Diddy kept a secret archive of incriminating videos recorded at his parties, which he used to control influential figures. These recordings, featuring politicians, artists, and businessmen, often showed participants in compromising situations, often under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Blackmail was Diddy's weapon, ensuring that no one dared to cross him, allowing him to remain untouchable for years while hiding his crimes. One of the most shocking revelations came when a world-renowned movie star was identified in one of Diddy's incriminating recordings from the mid-2000s. This actor, who had always maintained an impeccable public image, was shown in a state of complete vulnerability, clearly under the influence of drugs. This recording was used to keep the actor silent for years, and he never spoke publicly about his experience with Diddy. His career, however, began to decline shortly afterward, and many now believe that he paid a high price for his involvement with Diddy's circle. Another disturbing revelation was that Diddy didn't just host these events in his mansions or private islands. On several occasions, he organized these gatherings in public venues under the guise of charity events or glamorous parties. Guests often had no idea of the real purpose behind these gatherings. Those selected to participate in the private rituals quickly learned the true sinister nature of these parties. Security reports from some of these events indicated that Diddy employed a highly trained security team to ensure no one left the venue without his permission. Some of the most chilling accounts involved guests who tried to leave after realizing what was happening but were swiftly detained by armed security and forced back into the event. Diddy's control over these gatherings was absolute, and he ensured that no detail escaped his grasp. As the investigation deepened, the FBI began focusing on Diddy's financial operations. Suspicions of money laundering and funding for human trafficking networks started to emerge. Diddy, long considered a business genius, was now being portrayed as the leader of an international criminal organization. Suspicious financial transactions, particularly donations and sponsorships to charitable events and organizations, came under scrutiny. These donations, which initially appeared to be acts of goodwill, were now seen as part of a money laundering scheme designed to cover up illicit activities. Authorities began investigating these connections and questioning the true intentions behind Diddy's so-called philanthropy. Many of these organizations, when investigated, were found to be tied to individuals involved in human trafficking and exploitation. As Diddy's case continued to grow in scale and gravity, the global media began pushing for more answers. Television programs and documentaries started delving into the dark details of Diddy's life, bringing forward testimonies from former employees, victims, and even other celebrities. These media investigations painted an even darker picture of Diddy, not just as a figure of power, but as someone who had built his empire on the destruction of human lives. One of the most pressing questions that emerged during these investigations was, how had Diddy managed to keep his activities secret for so long? The answer seemed to lie in his vast network of connections and his ability to manipulate the system in his favor. With powerful friends in politics, media, and entertainment, Diddy used his influence to ensure no one dared to expose his crimes. He maintained a careful balance between being adored by the public and feared by those who knew his darkest secrets. However, as more disturbing details emerged, it became clear that Diddy's empire was beginning to crumble. Celebrities who had once supported him started to distance themselves, with some even issuing public statements condemning his actions. Artists who had collaborated with him in the past were now being questioned about what they knew and when they knew it. The fear of being associated with Diddy grew, and many were scrambling to save their own reputations. Some of the most shocking revelations came from Diddy's former collaborators, who had spent years working alongside him. They revealed that while many were aware of his excessive lifestyle, few knew the full extent of his illicit activities. Diddy was a master of compartmentalizing his life, ensuring that only those in his closest circle knew the dark details of his operations. This allowed him to maintain a pristine public facade for years while operating in the shadows. But that facade was now starting to crumble. The allegations were too numerous to ignore, and the public demanded justice. Victims continued to come forward, brave enough to face the threats they knew would come. With each new testimony, it became clear that Diddy's web of power was far more complex than anyone had initially imagined. The investigation began to extend to other influential figures who had previously been on the fringes of the case. Businessmen, politicians, and even sports figures were now being investigated for their connections to Diddy. The FBI expanded its international operations, working with security agencies in other countries to trace the global reach of Diddy's activities. Authorities were determined not just to bring down Diddy, but to dismantle the entire network. By this point, the case had become one of the largest criminal investigations involving a public figure in recent memory. And while Diddy had accumulated enough power to protect himself for years, he now found himself increasingly cornered. What the future held for him and those still entangled in his web of exploitation remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: Diddy's dark empire was beginning to collapse. As investigations progressed and the net tightened around Diddy, more questions arose about who else was involved in this vast network of exploitation and manipulation. The FBI began to focus on other influential figures in the music industry who, according to internal sources, had actively participated in Diddy's parties and rituals. Among them were names that shocked the public, including some of the biggest icons in contemporary music. The consequences for these artists could be devastating. Some of these artists also faced scrutiny for their own questionable behavior, with reports suggesting they hosted similar parties where drugs and degrading practices were common. Many of these events were held under the guise of VIP parties for the elite, but witness accounts indicated that what happened behind closed doors was far more disturbing. There was growing suspicion that Diddy was not the only leader of this operation, but rather a piece of a much larger puzzle. Investigators began working with theories that involved other celebrities and powerful businessmen who, like Diddy, used their influence to control and manipulate not only their victims, but also their industries. Prominent names in music, film, and even sports were now being investigated under the same suspicion of human trafficking and abuse of power. The idea that these industries were corrupt to their core spread rapidly, and the public began losing trust in the public figures they once idolized. Meanwhile, some of Diddy's closest associates began distancing themselves. Business partners, record label executives, and even longtime friends publicly severed ties with him. Statements were released, with many claiming they were unaware of any criminal activity involving Diddy, but given the ongoing investigations, they preferred to distance themselves from any association with him. The desperate attempt to salvage their reputations was clear, but the increasingly skeptical public was no longer buying these excuses. The narrative that Diddy was being targeted in a conspiracy also began gaining traction in certain media circles and on social media. Some argued that Diddy was being framed for challenging even more powerful figures, and that the accusations against him were part of a larger scheme to bring him down. However, these conspiracy theories quickly lost ground as more concrete evidence began to surface, including audio and video recordings showing Diddy in compromising situations. What shocked the public most was the leak of a video allegedly showing Diddy at one of his private parties, actively participating in one of the humiliation rituals described by several witnesses. In the video, which quickly went viral on social media, Diddy could be seen coercing several participants into performing degrading acts while he watched with a cold and indifferent expression. The video caused immediate outrage and was the final blow to Diddy's reputation. With the leak of this video, even Diddy's closest allies began to distance themselves. Influential figures in the music industry who had publicly defended Diddy now remained silent or issued vaguely condemning statements, attempting to dissociate themselves from the scandal. However, for many, the silence of these figures was seen as an admission of guilt by omission. They knew what was happening but chose to ignore it while benefiting from Diddy's power and influence. As Diddy awaited trial, new revelations about his financial empire began to emerge. The FBI traced millions of dollars in transactions that connected Diddy to various offshore accounts and shell companies used to fund illicit activities and maintain his lavish lifestyle. These transactions, according to authorities, were part of a money laundering scheme involving several prominent figures in the music and film industries, raising further suspicions about the extent of Diddy's network. Financial documents obtained by authorities revealed something even more disturbing: a connection between Diddy and powerful figures in the fashion industry, particularly businessmen who had been accused of exploiting and abusing young models. This connection raised the hypothesis that Diddy could be involved in a human trafficking network that extended beyond entertainment, affecting the world of fashion and advertising. Investigators were now working to unravel this web of dark connections. A key witness, a former model who had worked on advertising campaigns linked to brands associated with Diddy, claimed she was taken to one of these parties under the pretense of meeting important industry executives. However, upon arriving, she realized it was a private event where she was drugged and abused. According to her testimony, she was never able to recover her career after that event, as she was threatened that if she spoke out, she would never work in the fashion industry again. Such accounts became common as more victims from different industries began to come forward. With each new testimony, it became clearer that Diddy's power extended beyond the music industry, reaching into various spheres of influence. Powerful figures in politics, fashion, and even media seemed either involved or, at the very least, aware of what was happening in the shadows of Diddy's events. However, fear of retaliation and the psychological control he exerted over his accomplices kept many silent for years. As the case advanced, even more disturbing theories emerged about the true extent of Diddy's network. Some investigators began exploring the idea that he was part of a much larger organization with roots in secret societies that have manipulated global elites for centuries. The Masons continued to be mentioned in the investigations, and Diddy's connection to powerful figures within the organization seemed to be a key factor in understanding how he had operated for so long without being discovered. Experts on secret societies began analyzing Diddy's behavior patterns and the symbolism present at his events. Many believed that the rituals he performed at his parties were not just eccentricities, but part of a process of initiation and mind control. These rituals, according to some theorists, followed ancient traditions of power manipulation, where participants were forced to endure traumatic experiences to ensure their loyalty to the organization. The idea that Diddy was involved in a global secret network seemed too conspiratorial for some, but the evidence continued to suggest otherwise. Details about the organization of these parties, the symbols used, and even the locations where they occurred pointed to something much larger than a simple case of abuse of power by a celebrity. Diddy, according to these theories, was merely the public face of a much more complex and insidious operation. Pressure on the authorities increased as the public demanded answers. Documentaries and special reports began exploring Diddy's connections to other powerful figures, revealing even more layers of corruption and abuse. The P. Diddy case became a symbol of everything wrong with the global elites, a system of power and privilege that allowed influential figures to abuse their positions without fearing repercussions. As Diddy's trial approached, the global media watched every move closely. There was an expectation that more powerful names would be revealed as the investigations progressed. The impact of this trial would be felt not only in the entertainment industry but worldwide, as it demonstrated how far power and corruption could extend when left unchecked. For the victims, however, the issue was not just about seeing Diddy and his accomplices punished, but about fighting for justice and reclaiming their shattered lives. Many of them still lived with the trauma of the abuses they endured, and Diddy's trial represented a chance to finally expose the truth and close a dark chapter of their lives. The road to justice, however, would be long, and many of these victims still feared that Diddy's power and connections might somehow protect him from the consequences of his crimes. As the trial approached, one question lingered. How far would Diddy and his influential connections go to hide the truth? The public and the victims were eager for justice, but they knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. However, with each new revelation, Diddy's web of power grew weaker, and the truth, as dark as it was finally coming to light. The upcoming trial of Diddy has captivated the world, becoming one of the most anticipated legal battles of the decade. The gravity of the charges against him has brought to light not just his alleged personal misdeeds, but also an entire network of exploitation and abuse that spans industries and borders. As victims found their voice, empowered by a growing movement for justice and backed by high-profile legal teams, the momentum for holding the rich and powerful accountable grew stronger by the day. On the day of the first hearing, the scene outside the courthouse was electric. Protesters gathered, wielding signs demanding justice for the victims, while the media swarmed every corner, eager for the next revelation in what had already become one of the largest celebrity scandals in history. The case against Diddy symbolized a greater struggle, one that targeted not just a single individual, but a system that allowed unchecked power to shield the privileged from consequences for far too long. As Diddy arrived at court, tension filled the air. His outward demeanor was one of confidence, yet signs of wear and fear cracked through his facade. Surrounded by a legal dream team, known for representing high-profile clients in the face of damning evidence, Diddy's defense was prepared to argue that the allegations were baseless and blown out of proportion by a sensationalist media. But with the mountain of evidence gathered over the years, including damning recordings, witness testimonies, and incriminating financial documents, the stakes were incredibly high. The prosecution wasted no time setting the stage for what was to be a grueling trial. They painted a picture of a man who, for decades, had masterminded a vast operation involving human trafficking, psychological and physical abuse, and a pervasive manipulation of powerful figures across entertainment, politics, and other industries. It was not just about Diddy's crimes, the prosecutor argued, but about dismantling a structure of power that thrived on exploitation. Cassie, a central figure in the case, gave one of the most harrowing testimonies. As one of Diddy's most well-known victims, her story had already made headlines, but her detailed account in the courtroom of the years of abuse, manipulation, and coercion was more gut-wrenching than anything previously known. She described the control Diddy exerted over her life, both mentally and physically, recounting horrific experiences during the years she was trapped in his orbit. Her testimony set the tone for what was to come. Following her, other victims shared equally horrifying stories. A former model testified about how she was lured into one of Diddy's notorious parties, believing it to be a professional opportunity, only to be drugged and forced into participating in humiliating and abusive rituals. The chilling details provided by security personnel, who admitted being complicit in Diddy's operations, added further weight to the case. They confirmed that Diddy's events were meticulously orchestrated to ensure no details of the dark underworld within his luxury lifestyle ever surfaced. Day after day, the courtroom was filled with shocking revelations. It became clear that Diddy's parties were just the tip of a much darker iceberg. What started as accusations of personal misconduct had spiraled into an expose of systemic abuse involving several industries and powerful players. Influential figures in fashion, politics, and entertainment, including high-ranking executives, producers, and even royals, were implicated. The inclusion of the fashion industry in the case took many by surprise. Several prominent fashion moguls were implicated as having participated in or even co-organized the abusive events Diddy hosted. A former model who attended one of these events on a private island provided a particularly poignant testimony, detailing how she was drugged and repeatedly abused, her life forever scarred by the experience. As more names emerged, the case expanded beyond the initial scope. Investigators were uncovering a web that reached across industries, with evidence suggesting that human trafficking and abuse had been enabled and concealed through a network of powerful allies. Brands associated with Diddy came under scrutiny, and public pressure mounted for justice to be served. Diddy's legal defense fought back with a narrative that the media had inflated the case and that many accusers had ulterior motives. However, with so much concrete evidence, including financial documents that traced money laundering and incriminating videos showing abuse happening at his events, the defense's arguments crumbled. The prosecution presented phone records, emails, and other digital evidence that painted an irrefutable picture of Diddy's guilt. Experts in trauma were brought in to explain the profound psychological toll such prolonged abuse and manipulation can take on a person, adding weight to the victims' testimonies. They detailed how Diddy had used a combination of fear, violence, and drugs to maintain a psychological grip on his victims, causing them to feel utterly powerless. This aspect of the case horrified the public as they realized how deeply rooted and long-lasting the effects of Diddy's abuse were. As the trial reached its final stages, rumors spread that several other powerful figures were about to be formally charged. The public's demand for accountability grew stronger, with calls for the investigation to extend beyond Diddy. This was no longer just about one man. It was about uncovering the truth about a network of corruption, manipulation, and exploitation. For many, the downfall of Diddy marked the beginning of a larger reckoning. The entertainment industry, long immune to consequences, was being forced to confront its darkest secrets. With Diddy as the first major figure to be tried for such systemic abuse, others involved in his web of exploitation were now in the spotlight. As the trial came to a close, the weight of evidence against Diddy was insurmountable. He was found guilty on multiple counts, including human trafficking, sexual abuse, psychological manipulation, and financial crimes. His empire, once built on the suffering of others, began to collapse. Civil lawsuits from victims quickly followed, leading to the freezing of his assets and the dismantling of his fortune. The reverberations of the trial were felt far beyond the courtroom. The entertainment industry, shaken to its core, began to reform as companies distanced themselves from individuals and practices long tolerated for the sake of profit. Many other powerful figures faced investigations, with some stepping down from their positions or fleeing the public eye. Though Diddy's fate was sealed with his conviction, the larger battle against the network of exploitation he symbolized was just beginning. The trial had pulled back the curtain on a world few outside the industry had ever imagined existed. The victims, finally seeing some justice, began to heal and reclaim their lives, supported by a global movement that promised to hold the powerful accountable for their actions. In the end, Diddy's fall was more than just the collapse of one man's empire. It was the dawn of a new era of accountability. His story, once one of glamour and success, would forever be remembered as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and a rallying cry for justice for those who had been silenced for too long. If you found this content compelling and want to keep following these groundbreaking stories, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more shocking revelations and deep dives into the worlds of power, fame, and hidden truths. Until next time, remember, the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always comes to light.